part 2 of 2 of an interview with Sofia Smallstorm on the club.
Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. My guest today is Sofia Smallstorm. Sofia returns to the show to offer her insights into the dark and sinister world of what she refers to as the club, and how this malevolent and occult society is behind the desecration of humanity. Tonight's discussion will be based on 2 of Sofia's recent newsletters: the October newsletter, where she shares her views on the club and its pervasive influence, and the November newsletter, where she shares her thoughts on the John Podesta email leaks and the Comet Ping Pong scandal, which some researchers believe have exposed an elite pedophile ring operating in the Washington, D.C. area. Sofia is a researcher and documentary filmmaker. She is best known for her documentaries on Unraveling Sandy Hook and 9/11 Mysteries. She is also recognized for her research regarding geoengineering and synthetic biology. Sofia's newsletters are subscriber-based. Her website is sofiasmallstorm.com. Sofia, how are you doing?
I'm fine, Tim. Thank you very much for inviting me back.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for coming back on the show. Your November newsletter, where you focused on this Podesta emails and this Pizzagate scandal, which seems to have revealed or many people believe reveals or exposes a pedophile ring operating in Washington, D.C. Now, I think you've talked a lot about the details of it. I think we're familiar with the emails, the strange wording, which make no sense literally, but they do make sense if you understand some of these words: hot dogs, pizza, as code words for pedophilia, which I think the FBI recognizes as code words for pedophilia, and the strange love that this Comet Ping Pong operation run by Mr. Elefantis has, or interest it has, with children, which is odd. But in your talk, and also in the newsletter, you talk about this, the issue of pedophilia, and how there's been a trend to normalize pedophilia, which is very similar to the efforts of the 70s, 80s, and 90s to normalize homosexuality. Do you want to get into that?
Yes, it's very pervasive, and they're going to keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it, just the way they did with the gay movement. There is a writer, Margot Kaplan. She's actually a Rutgers University law professor, and she wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times. The date is October 5th, 2014. And Margot, you can Google it, Margokaplan. So she states in this op-ed piece that people actually live with pedophilia. They have a shame about it. It's simply a sexual attraction to prepubescence, and that it can be viewed as a mental illness. But our laws don't serve these people properly, because when these people should, for whatever reason, commit the crime of pedophilia, at least the article seems to believe that pedophilia, once it's actually committed, is a crime. That's when the agencies come after these victims of this mental illness and punish them, but that there should be recognition of the fact that there are many people who are pedophiles. Now, I'm quoting Margot Kaplan, who never do anything. They never act on their impulses. And so there's an organization, Virtuous Pedophiles, and this organization provides support for pedophiles who don't molest children and who even believe that sex with children is wrong. So these would be inactive or non-practicing pedophiles, and that pedophile is a status. Pedophilia is a status. It's not an act. So when you get to the point that it's an act, then you've crossed the line. And so I think what she's trying to advocate is that we should have sympathy for pedophiles, and we should allow them to be appropriately employed. This is what she calls it. We should hold them responsible for their conduct, but not for the underlying attraction that they have to live with, that dogs them and causes them to, retreat and skulk around and hide. We should bring all this out into the open. So that caused me to start wondering about, well, if they've got virtuous pedophiles, an organization, they might end up with an organization called celipeds, celibate pedophiles. And you might have a principal of a school who's a celibate pedophile. Don't worry, children, because he's never touched a child in 25 years. He's a good man. He's safe to be around.
Well, what we're getting in society with this normal attempt to normalize or sympathize with pedophilia, it's being, being entertained in academia. There's also what we've seen, of course, in recent years, is this sexualization of children, which has occurred in entertainment, in fashion, with music. Obviously, whether it's Miley Cyrus or Britney Spears a few years ago, her music video, dancing around, sexually in a plaid skirt, looks like a Catholic schoolgirl's uniform. Of course, in the 70s, we had this introduction of sexual education, with the goal, I guess, of the stated goal of reducing teenage pregnancy. Of course, it's gone up 400% since then, as the programs have become more explicit. I think it was in the 70s when Life magazine put on the cover, teenage pregnancy, and because Time magazine had a cover, children having children. So all of these things seem to have sort of a revelation of the method to them, where by addressing the topic, by making it an issue that we're supposedly concerned with, that everyone's talking about, we're actually promoting it, and we actually aggravate the problem, which might be the goal, of the social engineers. If you recall, with AIDS, the AIDS scare of the 80s, it became a pretext to implement very graphic sex ed courses for adolescents, school-age kids. And I believe I came across this when I was reading Nancy Turner Banks's book, AIDS, Diamonds, and Empire. I think you've interviewed her, and you read that book, right?
Yes, it's a very thorough book.
Yeah, and she was talking about AIDS, and of course the problem of the AIDS virus, HIV, being the source of AIDS. It's a lot of controversy with that, but I don't want to get into that right now. But she was talking about, it was the 1989 National Research Council, which produced a study that was funded by the Bristol Sage Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the usual suspects, U.S. Public Health Service, and it was AIDS, sexual and intravenous drug use. And I think it read something like, the epidemic necessitates the rapid mobilization of the community to counter the spread of this illness and disease. There's the fear factor there being utilized. And through this fear, they were able to implement these sex ed programs, which otherwise parents would have rejected or would have opposed. But you tell people, if the kids don't learn this stuff, they're going to contract AIDS. They'll never acquiesce to it. But in the report, it actually stated, if I can get the report, it says, what is not yet known is how to introduce fear in the right way in a particular message intended for a particular audience. Acquiring that knowledge will require planned variations of age education program that are carefully executed out and then carefully evaluated. The report went on to express how to attack societal moral values related to speaking and writing about sexuality in explicit terms. Again, they were advocating the direct attack on our children when they stated, despite recent indications of great increased tolerance of sexual explicitness in the media and literature, their reluctance remains strong in much of the population, and it is particularly strong in the instance of that education of children and adolescents. So they're using the crisis of... I'm sorry, can you hear me?
It just cut out briefly. I heard you're introducing the crisis of...
Oh, good. Okay, sorry. They're introducing the crisis of AIDS to introduce all this sexual explicitness with kids. So already you have... we're not talking about secret society stuff here. We're not talking about Skull and Bones. We're not talking about the club. Nor are we talking about Freemasonry or the Elks Club or the Eagles Club or some sort of satanic, secret society. This is the U.S. Public Health Service, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Russell Sage Foundation, our public schools, intentionally sexualizing all children under the cover of a public health measure, but normalizing all this stuff with the children. If you, this has been occurring for decades, under the guise of official policy.
Yeah, that's a very good insight, Tim. And I really haven't heard anyone put it that way. Most people, when they talk about AIDS, they talk about the fraud of HIV causing AIDS, or something related more to the medical research. But you have really nailed it. Excellent. That's exactly what they did. And now, sorry.
And one other thing is this case with Comet Ping Pong Pizza. So now we get this scandal of pedophilia that's thrown out to the public. We're kind of aware of it, but we're never really going to get we're never going to get an investigation of it. We're never going to get some sort of, no one's going to close the book on it. It's just going to be out there. I was talking to a couple people regarding, there's an alchemical process that goes on with this revelation of the method. I think it was, we saw this with this Clinton scandal with Monica Lewinsky, how with the Starr report, first of all, the whole Kenneth Starr was fixated on the Lewinsky angle and ignored the Mena, Arkansas, the real stuff, with the drug dealing and what they were doing in Mena with the FBI, with the CIA and the Bushes. But by fixating on the sordid sexual details of Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky and getting into the news, everyone was talking about it, getting into the meaning of sex is, and everyone's talking about fellatio in public, and it's being debated on the news shows, and pretty soon the stuff is being talked about in front of middle school kids. And they found out that in the wake of that scandal, there was a marked increase in sexual activity, particularly that sexual activity, among middle school kids. Mission accomplished.
Very interesting.
And Michael Hoffman, in his book, Secret Societies. He had an intro on this. He's talking about it's sort of this revelation of the method. And then you got into this because, well, first of all, let me get to you in your newsletter. If I can get to the highlights, is in that October newsletter, you close it out with a discussion. Well, about, if I can get to it in my notes here. It's about how society comes to accept this. We don't do anything. How with Comet Ping Pong Pizza, the club has signaled society that they're doing this. And in action, we sort of relieve them of the karmic effect of their sordid activity and almost ratify it if we don't do anything about it, despite the fact when it's revealed to us. We're sort of setting on to it. Do you have your newsletter there? Can you read that section to us?
Yes, I'm going to read two paragraphs.
Yeah.
The title of this section is The Silence of the Lambs. And I say, imagine years from now how we're going to coexist with people with pedophilic disorders who have done no harm, but the neighborhood children know and are scared of those houses. Imagine the parents who will be indoctrinated to forgive in advance, be tolerant and understanding. The treatment is effective. The treatment, by the way, is chatting with an expert or taking pharma drugs, of course. What else? The treatment is effective and your kids should be safe. What the law professor's piece utterly fails to mention is that where there's smoke, there's often an additional case of fatal blazing fire in the form of satanic rituals accompanying pedophilic activities. I say pedo activities in my newsletter, in which children are abused to the point of death and or are sacrificed. Not a word of this, and I bet that if pedophilia is eventually legalized, this depraved underworld will remain completely hidden, the stuff of crazy YouTubers' imaginings only. By leaking the Podesta emails to us and watching the resulting storm grow into a typhoon, the club has sent us an invitation to respond. With its debunking of the typhoon as fake news, the sheeple will blink and go back to their daily grazing, TV, shopping, Facebook. The typhoon is the reaction of a small minority whose cries will likely be obliterated by the vast enveloping silence of the lambs. Thus the club will gain its requisite karmic permission to carry on with its secret/sacred affairs, for they did let us know, they gave it all to us. But as a collective, we fail to react, object, oppose them. It's about scope, numbers, the majority versus the few.
Yeah, and then you finish up with your discussion. You're talking with a lady friend of yours regarding the Franklin cover-up, and after I guess going over some of the sort of details, she sort of said, "Well, it's not my children. I have my own children to worry about. I'll let you worry about those children."
Yeah.
Yeah.
She actually said, "You can worry about other children in the world. You're good at it. You can worry for me." I remember this. I could not even believe it.
And what struck me is when I read that part of your newsletter, it reminded me of something that Michael Hoffman wrote. He wrote Psychological Warfare and Secret Societies, I think. And he says he writes the idea of revelation method from a perspective of the British intelligence, as he says. He says about revealing some of these scandals. He says this demonstrates, this is from the standpoint of one of the, members of the secret society or a member of British intelligence is the context that he's writing, but this is what he writes. He says, this demonstrates one of our simpler methods. Realizing that our activities will sooner or later come to light, we structure our activities so that as conspiracy researchers unravel them, they will release information in such a way that it mirrors our initiatory procedure. In this way, the more we are investigated, the more the masses of people are psychologically processed by the people who seek to expose us. The meme that constitutes our structure is then successfully mimicked within the consciousness of those who investigate us. Success can then be measured precisely to the extent that our work is exposed, in quotes, in quotation marks. And so when some of these scandals occur and there's no real investigation, no punishment, no consequences for these actions, society is nevertheless exposed to the scandalous nature of what these people are doing. It gets out there, it gets talked about, just like as Bill Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky led to an increase in oral sex among middle school students. These scandals about pedophilia, when nothing is really done about it, in a sense sort of normalizes it. And I had this, I was thinking about this over the Christmas holiday weekend, that the issue of transgenderism came up. And one, one person who was attending this holiday dinner, Christmas dinner, was talking about the North Carolina situation, and a debate started about the bathroom issue and transgenderism and how are we supposed to handle this. And I was thinking, here we are, all adults, talking about transgenderism around a bunch of kids.
Oh, wow.
When I was a kid, I never even heard of it. Yet now it's being talked about a bunch of kids. And I'm forced to debate this issue with a couple of people, or I'm drawn into a debate, and I have to talk about this subject when in the past, my 14-year-old daughter never would have heard anything about such things until perhaps a little later in life she would have come across it. But it's being normalized as something that, and this is this sort of alchemical process that's going on. It's degradation of society.
Well, children have been exposed to so much over the last few decades and generations. I mean, even the performance of rock stars. I remember watching a Jimi Hendrix concert on television. This is, of course, we lived in Sweden, which was progressive, but it was the 1970s. And my mother came upstairs and she was just horrified because here's Hendrix and he's like thrusting his pelvis and doing these really gross things while he's playing his guitar. And of course my brother and I were watching. We didn't really know what to think of it because we were about 12 and 13. But my mother stood there going, what is he doing? And then I think there was one scene, it's very famous, where he actually pees on his guitar or something. He sets it on fire. I don't know if that was in this bit of footage, but I remember seeing that or something like that on TV, and my mother just going nuts.
Well, I mean, I've done a number of interviews and about that, about sort of this, well, the influence of like Aleister Crowley. Of course, a lot of musicians, rock stars, worship Aleister Crowley, and his connections to intelligence and connections to people like Alfred Kinsey, who was promoted by Time Life. And Alfred Kinsey, of course, was a big promoter of pedophilia through his research, you know, and his research, rather flawed research, was sort of setting the it sort of created the academic setting for the unleashing of the sexual revolution of the 1960s, and he was promoted, you know, by all the institutions, and you know, whether it's Life magazine or New York Times, but I came across this. You're talking about, you know, this sort of this degradation, sort of this introducing these things to society. People tend to think of it as sort of linear development or societal decay that's occurring naturally. It has no real plan to it or agenda. It's just kind of happening. But in 1969, there's something called the Jaffe Memo, and it was a memo that was recorded meeting of Planned Parenthood in 1969, I think in Pennsylvania. Planned Parenthood was commissioned by the U.S. government to address population control, and in that meeting, they openly talked about overly or proposing sexualizing society, sexualizing children, promoting homosexuality, promoting things like family breakup. Because if you promote family breakup, you make it easier to sexualize society, because within broken families, children are much more vulnerable to abuse and trauma. And through abuse and trauma is where you get afflictions like, largely where you get, some people believe, where homosexuality is derived. That similar program was proposed by the book The Authoritarian Personality, which was published by the American Jewish Committee, working in conjunction with the CIA, you know, promoting cultural Marxism, promoting weakening the family, weakening parental, particularly the role of the father in the family, to break apart and weaken society. So it's been a long, drawn-out plan. You know.
Well, Tim, I just want to call attention. I'm reading a book about Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood, and granted, it's a mainstream book, but I'm not all the way through it by any means. But I was interested to note that Sanger received many letters from women who were in these situations that were impossible for them. I don't know if you're aware, but as they were building the railroad across the country, people in the cities, population was growing so quickly that families often had one child for every year of marriage. So these women had been writing to Sanger telling her, I wish you could invent a pill to stop pregnancy or prevent pregnancy, because I can't be pregnant again. My husband comes home, he's drunk, and he rolls on top of me, and I'm pregnant. Boom. And then it's another child. I already have too many children. I can't keep having children. I mean, it was very difficult for these women. It takes a toll on your body. Yes, it's a natural process, and it's lovely and all of that, but it does take a huge toll on the female body to produce a child. You're making another human being. And then to have one for every year of marriage, and to be, you know, poor. And this was when people left the land. They were invited, and this is by propaganda and social engineering, to quit being farmers and get to the cities where they could have a much easier job, where they didn't have to do back-breaking work out in the field starting at 4 a.m., feeding the chickens and plowing the soil. They could now work in a factory, and they could be a, you know, widget mover. And look how easy that would be. And it's indoors, and you're not going to have aches and pains. But seriously, they didn't have the land to feed their families. So their overall gain went way down, and the women were suffering. They did not know, they were beside themselves. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, yeah, the urbanization, of society, and the pauperization of society. Well, it's similar to what occurred in England with the enclosure movement, which created paupers and created the surplus labor for the Industrial Revolution. It's society is always going to have its problems, and that's. But there's ways you can exploit a problem to achieve an end, which isn't necessarily advertised. That's the Rockefeller Foundation is good at that, where they promote things like equality, right, or women's rights, and be liberated, go get a job and be liberated, as if that's liberation. And we're seeing what's happening today with that, where women are now have become wage slaves in many respects, and they don't have the benefit of a larger family, of a support system, or even extended families. One benefit of those rural communities was you had extended families, and you could have a support system. Whereas when they created the nuclear family, you were slowly cutting them off from their past, their lineage, their ethnic background, and they become deracinated. And they eventually became the middle class, where they, once they built the highway system and moved them into the homes and the tract homes of the suburbs, they were much more easily managed to convert them into sort of these addicted consumers that we see today. But largely what American society is today. So, but
and the nature of living changed so much, because once the people were taken from the land, imagine how disconnected they became from sunlight and from dirt, which give you the electrons necessary to remedy that situation you mentioned earlier, called oxidative stress, which is failure of the cells to produce enough energy to keep themselves going. So you can have oxidative stress to your entire body, or to certain areas or tissues or organ systems, and then you start having degeneration, cell death, potentially cancer. So when the people were taken out of the sunlight and the earth, from which they get electrons, this is called free electron transfer, and the photons of sun help to produce not just ATP in the cells, but vitamin D, which is necessary for God knows how many hundreds of biological activities that are crucial to good health. So now the people are indoors, they're living away from the sun and the land, they're working indoors, and the children are not benefiting from frolicking around on the farm and, learning just by living. The children have to be educated by the school system because they can't be sent out into the city streets where they would become pickpockets and worse, right? So the health status of the populace goes way down. They start to develop these modern illnesses, illnesses of degeneration. And all of that, it's just a big spiral. So it says to me that we need to be living in small communities in contact with land and light.
Yeah,
and we're not doing that.
Yeah, and in a society or a community that's agrarian based, you're going to have local markets for food. It's going to be largely outside the money economy, but that makes these societies less manageable. You can't have globalism with these independent communities, they can still trade with the communities nearby, and even get some of the benefits of the city. Whether that's through the Sears catalog or something. There's a balance here, I guess. But yeah, you're right. You're not participating in life itself, and you're not. If you look at the people who one of the problems of living in the city is you're not familiar with with how food grows, where it comes from. You're dependent on the money economy, and I guess during the Great Depression, one silver lining of the Great Depression was that America was still largely rural and agrarian. So when the money economy collapsed, many people could get by. They made their own clothes. They repaired their own clothes. They grew their own food. So when the stock market crashed and the bank closed, they could still support themselves.
Yeah, and on the land you have an abundance of food. I mean, look at a lemon tree. Look at how many lemons grow on a lemon tree, and how many lemons can one person eat, and we have little gardens, we have tomatoes galore, and zucchini grows like nobody's business, and on the farms there was always food to eat. And by the way, I want you to know that I have a friend who's an organic farmer in Colorado, and she told me this year that from her entire crop of corn, now granted she doesn't have huge cornfield, she only was able to get 2 edible ears of corn. And that's because of the massive filtration of sun. This is the sepsis agenda, biological darkness from chemtrail cover in Colorado. Things just don't grow anymore because they get filtered sunlight. That's the equivalent of moonlight.
So I guess eventually we'll have to get all our food from Monsanto. And they're
that's right.
Drought
tolerant seeds, renewable seeds, licensed food, genetically and people will be told, look, do you want to eat or do you not want to eat? If you want to eat, then you have to eat our GMO zucchini and tomatoes and GMO everything. And the aim, this is truly satanic, is to create food out of feces and blood. For instance, they've now innovated, this is somewhere in Denmark, there's a food lab, and they've decided that it's better to bind cake batter with blood, which has coagulants in it, than to use eggs. Because using blood is it's less wasteful. Animal blood this would be, but who knows, right?
Yeah, that appears satanic, I would say. And of course, we've heard stories about, was it Pepsi using a fetal material in their products, and not to mention what's used in some of the cosmetic products.
Right, but Belta, the cream made of American babies' foreskins. I mean, to me, Tim, this is an expansion of the activities that these high-level elites practice in secret, which are really sacred activities to them. But it's an expansion, it's an exportation of those activities so that we, unwittingly or not, are also participating, and that gives it, I guess, on some level, karmic approval, or what is the word? There's a word for it. To pass something.
Oh, more or less sort of they get an indulgence, so to speak, I guess.
Endorsement. Yeah. There's another word. I cannot think of it, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. They don't have to suffer they think somehow.
They don't have to suffer the guilt. Because, hey, these people are doing it too. They put the creams on their faces. The ladies rush to the department stores in London to buy this cream, and everybody's guzzling Pepsi. And so if if everybody's doing it, what's wrong with we're the ones who started it?
Yeah. I heard an interesting statistic a while back regarding what America spends on carbonated soda. And what they spend on vegetables, and apparently they spend 5 times more on carbonated soda a year than they do on vegetables. And they said if you just simply reverse that, you would probably solve a lot of people's health problems.
Well, of course, yes. And I will say that I just got a call from someone I know who told me she has cirrhosis of the liver. She's not an alcoholic. She doesn't even drink alcohol, and she has what's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And this can develop due to drinking soda pop.
Yep.
So, yeah, there are so many, blind corners and things that today you're fine, tomorrow you suddenly have a toxic load that's insurmountable and you start collapsing. And then where do you go first? You're taken to the hospital. I mean, this particular person was vomiting and, extremely ill. And it just came out of nowhere. And once you're in the hospital now, once you're admitted, they have the doctrine of parens patriae working in their favor. If you're, comatose or in critical condition, then it's their obligation to care for you in the best manner possible. But if you do actually sign into the hospital, then you have to submit yourself to their expertise, which is going to mean doing very expensive, exhaustive workups on you and treating you as they see fit, which as we know, pharma drugs and their treatment for acute situations when you're in a hospital can be beneficial, but treatment for anything chronic or long-term is generally, allopathic medicine does not know what it's doing, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, because they don't take anything like nutrition into consideration or toxicities, because that would indict the entire system.
Right. They don't stop to think that the pharmaceuticals they're pushing, which are, man-made chemical compounds, in some instances intended to imitate natural materials that have healed over the ages. For instance, aspirin comes from willow bark. Salicylic acid is known to relieve inflammation and pain. But anyway, these compounds that we're given in prescription form by our doctors, they all have a lethal dose. So this is a very interesting thing to look into, investigating what lethal dose is. Lethal dose on a drug, it can say lethal dose 50, which means that 50% of the people given this drug at this dose will die. That's what lethal dose means, I believe. Have you heard of this?
Yeah, I've heard that from a couple doctors. Explain that to me. And
yeah, so every drug, Jennifer Daniels does a very good job of explaining this. She is a physician who lost her medical license in America. She lives in Panama, but doctors, she calls them licensed killers. The reason they have the MD and the license to practice is because they're taught how to dispense agents of death, meaning the drugs. And when she started to offer her patients, I find this very interesting, and I'll just sandwich it in, but she was concerned that she had a death rate in her practice. So along with lethal dose, you have this term death rate, which means every practicing physician is going to have some people die on him or her. It's a consequence of whatever. You could just have a patient who's very old, or the medication that they're taking doesn't agree with them, or their illness, manages to conquer them in the end. Yeah. But somebody is going to die on a yearly basis, and your death rate is 4. That's considered good. If it's higher, then that's considered to be whatever it is. But in her case, she did not want any death rate, any positive number at all. She wanted a death rate of 0. So she started to offer her patients 3 options. She said, look, here's what you have. Here's my diagnosis. I believe that you could do X, Y, or Z. X is do nothing at all. She calls this it's related to the placebo effect. If you do nothing, you have a 33% chance of recovery. That's just a fact of human health. Or the second option was, these are natural methodologies. I've been reading books, and these are herbal treatments, natural treatments, so you could choose one of these. Or option number 3 is, this is what I was taught to recommend that you do. Drugs, prescribing drugs, or various kinds of other invasive treatments. So this is what my training says. This is the third option. Second option is the natural path. Third option is don't even do anything. And when she offered her patients these 3 choices, her death rate in her practice fell to 0.
That's when she got in trouble.
Well, she got in trouble because the hospital called her and they were saying, well, we haven't had any patients hospitalized by you. You haven't sent anyone for x-rays, and you haven't, hospitalized any of your patients with us. And she said, well, I haven't needed to. And when I do, I will. I'll call you. I'll send them to you for x-rays. And the drug companies were calling her saying, we haven't ordered any drugs from us lately. And she said, well, I haven't needed to, and when I do, I'll call you. And so this created an investigation, and it was decided that she was unfit to practice medicine in America. In the end, I've given you the short version.
Yes, I think she deviated from the standard of care, as she phrases it, I think, and that they didn't like that because, it's not in their business model, I guess, to have people getting better.
But that, Tim, takes us to this Children's Bill of Rights. Number 7 on that bill is the right to appropriate quality health care.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if you're a parent and you're not vaccinating your child, or you're not giving him, his flu shot every year, or some such thing, then, or his Ritalin, which they would tell you he needs, then he's not getting the proper health care, and he can be removed from your guardianship.
That's right. What constitutes proper health care?
Well, that's the operative term,
The devil's in the details, as they say, yeah.
Right, and they will get their bevy of experts to sit together and make a big, protocol of what is proper based on science. This is part of technocracy, this term that I'm learning about, which is another giant octopus like the club. And the club and technocracy are intertwined like, Siamese twins.
Yeah, the reign of experts.
Right.
Yeah, and what goes with that is the weakening and destruction of the family, because you create atomized, weak individuals that have no sense of community or their ethnicity, their family, their pedigree. They're just they're sort of out there alone and nothing to fall back on other than the cold embrace of the state, and that's what the objective is. In all these things, and we're talking, of course, we began this show talking about the club, this elite clique or inner circle, how they come to monopolize society, then how it relates to this apparent pedophile ring and child sex abuse, and of course, we were bringing up this, appropriate medical care or health care for children, and we're talking about child abuse. Can anything be more abusive than the vaccine schedule being increased, from like 4 to 6 to like 40 or 50 injections now?
Dozens by the age of 5.
Yeah.
Dozens.
Yeah. What exactly is that producing now? As we see, autistic rates skyrocket, other problems, allergies skyrocket. The idea that now, childhood illnesses and chronic illnesses are now normal, when they used to be unheard of. It used to be rare that you knew a kid that was chronically ill. It was just one unfortunate individual, one out of millions. Now it's chronic. It's become a huge industry. And if you look at the whole healthcare industry itself, these hospitals has become heavily financialized, with bonds being issued, and they got to pay out on those bonds. And to have those bonds, to keep up with those payments, you have to have customers coming in. You need sick people. So it's part of the business model. Sick people, healthy people.
There's a very good book written by a Dr. Sandeep Johar called Doctored, Doctored, and he really goes into the whole business model of medicine. And it's written, from his heart. He's a very intelligent man, and you just don't have the time to take care of people. They're just a number. They've got to be rotated in and out, and you have to conduct medicine as a business. And of course, the malpractice insurance, the cost of being a doctor is very, very high. Mm-hmm. Cost of med school, and then, so many of these doctors can't afford the Mercedes that they drive, and they've been given this reputation of being money hogs, but they have to, because it's so expensive for them to do this stuff that they're doing, which is ultimately not even helpful.
Yeah. And this all goes back to the creation of the MD, which is a Rockefeller project, and the Flexner Report back in the early part of the 20th century, and how they monopolized the allopathic, heroic medicine became the norm, whereas other integrative medicines like homeopathic or naturopath weren't really developed properly, which maybe they could have developed and gone a lot further now if the resources had been put into them. But there's been no competition against the allopaths, because it's illegal to compete with them. You have to have a license.
Right.
Yeah. So, well, Sofia, we talked about a lot. I want to thank you for spending so much time with me.
You're very welcome, Tim. It's always great to do a show with you, because you have a tremendous amount of knowledge. I'm always sitting here. Sometimes I put myself on mute just to let you go. But you have so many facts and figures at your fingertips, and you know so much. And I get educated deeply when I do these shows with you, which I've only done 2, but I want to do more so I can learn more.
One of these days I want to get into some of your research regarding medicine and alternative treatments, and sort of the plan, how the medical industrial complex factors into this, because it's all related. So maybe we'll talk about that next time.
Yes, and I'm studying microbiome now, and I have to say that I really don't do tons of research. I poke around a little bit, but I get just enough information, and then I go off and think. And then I start putting it together in interesting ways. And so I've come up with this notion of what microbiome is and what we really are able to handle in terms of microbiome.
And what you find out is that just with a little bit of knowledge, most people can avoid getting ill and have very healthy lives, happy lives, and be outside the system, which is exactly they don't want. They don't want that. They don't want people. I mean, you can't patent, these things. You can't charge exorbitant prices for just natural food and these things. And another thing is when we're told, that things like organic food is natural organic food is too expensive. The processed stuff is cheaper. But if you think about it, the amount you spend eventually with medical problems because of you're eating adulterated or depleted food sources and creating all the health problems, you're not saving any money in the end. You're losing money because you're having a much shorter, sicker life. And how do you quantify that, right?
Right. But there are so many pitfalls. The pitfall in organic food, I can go into that when we talk about
that's another thing.
Next show, yeah.
Well, there's so many pitfalls in alternative research in general. And that's no exception. You're right.
There are pitfalls in the world, but we must navigate by our intuition, our hearts, and a modicum of good information.
Yes.
And we must have friendships. We must have a network of people who care about us, even if it's small, and with whom we can discuss this so we can expand our understanding and get more ideas. It's very hard for people to do this in complete solitude. I have some friends who don't have anybody to talk to except me or, one or two other people at most. And some people have no one to talk to because they're walled off. Their spouse and their family, they're nuts. So to all those people, you're not nuts, you know that, and sooner or later, you will stumble into someone who knows what you know and can share ideas with you. So don't be lonely.
Yes. So, again, your website is sofiasmallstorm.com?
Yes, that's my URL that goes directly to my blog. And I post on my blog a few times a week. And then to the side, you'll see the tabs, and you can go to the podcast page. I do a couple of podcasts a month, and I've started to put up podcast interviews that I do with others like you. But I also want to mention to people that I have a store, an online store, avatarproducts.com, and you can get to the store from my blog. Links are there. And in that store, I share what I've discovered along the lines of body remediation. I really, since I turned 50 and started to get aches and pains and the usual stiffness, I was thinking, what is going on? There's got to be some way to feel better. And so what I've got in my store, it's not a giant store, but it's become popular with my listeners. And if something's in there, I just want to say this. It really works. It's worked for me, and people are finding that it's working very, very well for them too. And so I urge you to visit the store, avatarproducts.com, just see what's there, try a couple of things, start low. Buy something inexpensive and just see if it works or not, and then try other things.
Great. And your newsletter is by subscription, right?
Yes. There's a little icon on the blog page, sofiasmallstorm.com. You can read some samples. It's a $50 donation per year. And foreigners, it goes out by hard copy because I find that people who get something by email, they'll start reading it and then they get interrupted and they stop. So the hard copy newsletter goes to you in the mail, and you can, cuddle up in bed with it or some such thing, have some tea or soup and read it. And I try to make it very different each month, delving into a subject that has come across my path that I explain in a way that is entertaining but informative in the best way that I can make it that.
Great. Excellent. Well, listen, Sofia, thank you. And I'll only wish you, right now, today is New Year's Eve, so I'll wish you a Happy New Year.
Thank you, and Happy New Year to you too.
Thank
Tim.
you. And we'll keep in touch, and I'll bid you farewell for now. And
All right.
Enjoy the nice California weather.
It's not that nice. It's slate gray sky and raining here and there, but you know what? It's still enjoyable because it's the world.
That's right. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.